it's Brooke here, and this is the last edition of the 2024 On the Bias series. We've covered some interesting ones this year. So far I've covered the priming effect, the endowed progress effect, which was a new one to me. I really enjoyed diving into that one, the authority bias, and today actually I'm also covering one that is new to me. It's called pluralistic ignorance. And it just came up in an article I read recently, and I decided to dive in and include it in this series. So thank you for following along in the 2024 On the Bias series. We're going to dive into today's post. Typically, I start with a personal story. Today, I'm mixing it up. We are going to start with a quiz to see how well you know your fellow Earthmates. So get a pen and paper ready or something to jot down your answers, because I'm going to ask you the questions first and not reveal the answers right away. So the first two questions are related to a study that was done in February 2024 of a representative survey across 125 countries, interviewing nearly 130,000 individuals about climate action. So take a guess, question number one. What percentage of individuals surveyed said they would be willing to contribute 1% of their household income every month to fight global warming? So take a guess on what percentage you think said they'd be willing to do that. Second question. Take a guess on what percentage of individuals that were surveyed feel their national government should do more to fight global warming. All right, I'll give you a few seconds there. The second two questions are related to a March 2024 Pew Research Center kind of compilation of studies that they published the results of. These are US-based surveys, so the previous one is more global. This one's more US-based, specifically about how Democrats and Republicans view climate change issues. So take your guess. What percentage of Republicans in the United States support planting 1 trillion trees to absorb carbon emissions? I'll give you a second to jot down your guess. And the last one, take a guess. What percentage of Republicans in the United States support expanding the number of solar panel farms in the US? All right, so I'm going to give you some time to think about those responses. And here are the correct answers, or the answers that come out of the data and research results that I shared before. So the first one, 69% of individuals globally are willing to contribute 1% of their household income to fight global warming. 69%. 89% feel their national government should do more to fight global warming. 87% of Republicans support planting trees to absorb carbon emissions, and 70% of Republicans support expanding solar panel farms. How did your guesses compare to the actual data? If they look anything like mine, then they way underestimated how many people support these climate-related initiatives. So what's happening here? Miscalculating the majority stance on issues and assuming they are not closely aligned with our personal feelings is an example of pluralistic ignorance. This bias is closely related to social norms, but it focuses on inaccurate perceptions of the prevailing social norms, which in turn can shape our decisions and our behaviors. So a definition that's provided by the Decision Lab, which is quickly becoming one of my favorite resources for information on different biases, is pluralistic ignorance describes when we believe our private views differ from the majority. And they may, in fact, not differ. And we're not alone in experiencing this bias, especially regarding climate conservation and sustainability actions. Polls from a 2022 Yale program on climate change communications showed that 66 to 80% of Americans support climate change mitigation policies. That's great. Yet most Americans, like 80 to 90%, believe those support numbers are closer to 37 to 43%. Actual support is double what most people think it is. That's a big gap. The authors found the discrepancy between actual and perceived support so astounding that they offered a stronger phrase to describe the issue. So instead of calling it pluralistic ignorance, they recommend calling it a false social reality. And here's a quote from one of the authors of that study. "We found a form of pluralistic ignorance that we describe as a false social reality, a near universal perception of public opinion that is the opposite of true public sentiment." I should include like a mind blown emoji here at this point, if I can do that on this recording here. Let's bring this home a little bit. Let's reflect on the quiz results for our segment earlier and consider these questions. And I'm not going to answer these now, but kind of put them out here for hopefully as a prompt for you to consider a little bit later. When I shared the data results, did you believe them? And did your perspective shift at all upon learning that support for climate action is maybe way higher than you thought? And if so, then what doors kind of open up for us in outreach and engagement work if we embrace this data as truth? Personally, for me, this data has prompted me to consider how audience activation strategies and messages maybe could or maybe even should target more of the late majority segments in our diffusion of innovation curve, instead of believing that we're still in the early stages of adoption. So maybe mixing up our language a little bit there. Let's bring this bias to our behavior change programs and explore how it can hurt or help our programs. This week, I'm starting with how it can hurt. And the most significant challenge of pluralistic ignorance, or this false social reality, is that it stifles and stalls progress. It holds back our efforts to mobilize action and change in several ways. The first is that it reduces the audience's motivation to act. Individuals are more likely to act if the desired behavior is perceived as socially safe. Since we're a herd species, we feel more comfortable joining a growing movement rather than bucking the norms and striking out on our own. So when we believe that most people are not adopting sustainable behaviors, it removes the social incentive and safety net to participate in something new and different. The second way it impacts us is it creates a silent majority. And I'm going to start with a quote here from Greg Sparkman, who is one of the authors of the papers that I'm sharing in this post. Quote, "For people who might want to organize around climate, misperceiving these kinds of things will give them pause because it feels like you're up against something that's insurmountable. So there are large disempowering effects from underestimating just how popular these kinds of policies are." End quote. So if we believe that most people do not support the idea of sustainability, we may be hesitant to share how we're making changes in our own lives. This results in doing the work silently without making it a visible normative behavior, which then feeds back into what I described earlier, this issue of behaviors feeling socially unacceptable. Furthermore, silent majorities make it more difficult to achieve policy change. Policymakers love enacting regulations that are already popular among their constituents, right? It's an easy win for them. However, when the silent majority is uncomfortable voicing their preferences, decision makers may falsely assume that the louder groups represent everyone's viewpoints. And we know that's not always the case. So the third way that this bias can hurt our behavior change efforts is that it reduces confidence in creating change. And I'll start again with another quote, this one from Cynthia McPherson Franz, and she says, "Creating a sense of collective efficacy, that we can respond effectively to climate change, is all but impossible under this level of misperception," end quote. And like, yikes, crying emoji here. It can be exhausting to feel like you are constantly pushing a boulder up a mountain without evidence of progress. And many of us who work on conservation and sustainability projects who are listening to this and reading the post feel this way, and it can lead to burnout and hopelessness. But what if we are making progress? But pluralistic ignorance prevents us from seeing and embracing where our initiatives stand today. And we should also consider this from the audience's perspective. If we constantly deliver messages indicating that the majority is against us, i.e., we're pushing a boulder uphill, audiences could feel less confident in our collective ability to create change. In summary, pluralistic ignorance is a doozy of a bias that makes shifting social norms very challenging, even though the silent desired norm is actually in our favor. To overcome this, we must make the invisible more visible. This helps us highlight the true prevailing social norms, and the numbers seem to be on our side here. And it makes these behaviors socially safer to adopt for others who are not yet doing the behavior. And we can do this in two ways. One, provide symbols for the desired behavior. Voting locations hand out those I voted stickers for this very purpose. Voting, like many sustainable practices, happens behind closed doors. But if that private action can be made more visible through wearing stickers or talking about voting on social media, it provides a more accurate picture of how many people are actually taking action. And I talk a lot more about this in a post that I wrote, I think it was last year, could have been the year before, on using social proof to promote involvement and participation in No Mo May. So there's a link to that in the written version of this. I do recommend checking that out because it kind of dives into how making behaviors more visible can spark more of a social norm around it. The second thing we can do to overcome pluralistic ignorance is leverage our authority bias and our platforms. So in the previous On the Bias episode, I described the authority bias and how it can support our efforts since many of our institutions are viewed as trusted messengers. We can leverage this trusted position to talk more about the vast majority that supports conservation and sustainability initiatives, and then encourage our followers to speak up about it as well. Raising the profile of the prevailing norm helps everyone feel more confident and empowered to take action. I'm going to include another quote here from Cynthia McPherson-Franz that I think really drives this point home. Quote, "The empowering truth is that every public statement counts, and the more diverse the voices, the more effective the message will be. Further, when every member of society has the chance to see someone like them speaking in favor of action on climate change, power holders have a stronger mandate from which to work, and activists have a wellspring of concerned citizens from which to organize a movement." Could not have said that better myself by any means. So I mainly have focused on how this bias hurts our efforts. Let's take a brief look at how it helps. And I say brief because I could not find any positive examples in the write-ups about this bias, about how it helps us. And I'm beginning to wonder if articles about biases are biased about the benefits of biases. And that is a limerick I will put together another day. But after reading all these articles and papers, I can think of two ways this bias could benefit our behavior change efforts. And these might be a little bit of a stretch, but I want to put them out here anyway. So one way is that maybe the assumed norm is aligned with our goals. So let's take recycling as an example here. I believe we have established that recycling is important, and it's likely that most individuals assume that their friends, neighbors, and family members believe this as well. However, a growing number of people have started to silently wonder if recycling even works, and if it's worth the effort. So even if this skepticism continues to grow, people will likely continue recycling since it's viewed as the accepted norm. So in this case, pluralistic ignorance prevents a sustainable behavior from getting tossed aside, and it possibly buys us time while recycling systems get improved so they actually get better, and then people don't stop doing recycling in the meantime. But overall, I assume that this kind of benefit of this bias is going to be far and few between for the behaviors that we work on. But it came to mind, so I thought I wanted to include it here. The second way, and I believe this one much more than I believe the other one, that it helps our behavior change efforts, is that it activates the activists. So activists tend to mobilize when they feel that not enough is being done on a particular issue, or supporters aren't making their voices heard. For example, let's say a false assumption that people don't support solar panel farms could prompt climate activists to lead a movement that disrupts the status quo and brings greater attention to the topic. And the most successful activist movements target issues where a silent majority exists, as it gives people permission to express the views that they've been keeping to themselves. So if most people currently support sustainability initiatives, even though it's kind of silent support, we could see greater traction as our activist counterparts start emphasizing these issues even more. But a note of caution here, which I always include at the end of all of these on the bias post. We should be mindful of when our communication efforts may be feeding into pluralistic ignorance. If we overemphasize the opinions and data points of laggards, skeptics, and even, the haters, we can feed into an existing assumption that most people are not supportive of conservation and sustainability programs. While these types of headlines can increase clicks and open rates, in ascension, they can be, clickbait, they will not move us closer to achieving collective active action and change. Well, that's it for this bias. I hope you enjoyed learning more about one of the many ways we're wired. I again found this one fascinating because I dove into something that I'm less familiar with. And even though this is the last episode of the 2024 series, if there is a bias out there that you're interested in hearing more about, just hit me up. Let me know. Brooke@brooketully.com. I'll be doing this series again in 2025, and it's always helpful for me to know what things might be on your mind. Again, in the written version of this post, I include more resources, more references, if you want to go down a similar rabbit hole on this bias. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.